The only thing we are asking to the large language models is for transparency.
China basically is not messing around with combustion engines. It's making a great leap forward.
Next up is Thomas Friedman, three-time Pulitzer winner, New York columnist, a great well-wisher of Synapse. And I have to say that we're pretty heartbroken. Of all the speakers, we hadn't really repeated any, but Thomas Friedman, we think of him as a kind of, patron, because he was the first speaker to say yes for Synapse. He said he loves it so much, he wants to come back every year. So this year, again, he had accepted coming in person, but there's been a kind of personal situation that prohibits him from coming. So, unusually for him, he's going to join us on Zoom, but he promises to be here next year because he says he finds this extremely invigorating, but I'll let him make his own excuses for himself. And also joining him on stage is Carme Artigas Bruegel, who has an amazing array of things that she's been doing. She's been she's been the technology minister for Spain. She's part of the UN Council for AI, the co-chair for it. And she's been engaging with stakeholders across industry, across governments, across countries, trying to find answers for many of the things that we've been grappling with. And Tom also is working on a new book on AI. He's just come back from China. So both of them are brimming with absolutely new, fresh, hot off the oven insights. And I thank all of you for being here at the end of the conference, the same way that you were at the beginning. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Thomas Friedman and Carme Artigas. Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for joining us virtually. Can you hear me?
Hear you just fine, Shoma. I'm sorry I can't be there. There's just a little news going on in my own country these days that I'm afraid I have to attend to, but I was listening to your last session. It was great as always.
Thank you, Tom. So Tom, I'm just going to begin with you and then draw Carme into the conversation. As I said, you've been kind of researching a new book, and you've just been to China, so you've been talking to many different stakeholders across, this whole emerging new versions of AI that's coming our way. What would be some of the distillations that you've taken, which will go into the new book that you're writing?
Well, I would just start at 30,000 feet, if I could, Shoma. What the book is about is that we as a civilization have entered a new Promethean era, Prometheus being the Greek deity who steals fire from a closet on Mount Olympus and gives it to human beings. We know what Promethean moments are. They're the printing press, the scientific revolution, the ag revolution, the industrial revolution, and this moment. What defines a Promethean moment is that ultimately it's the introduction of a set of technologies and ideas that demand that you don't just change one thing, they demand that you change everything. How you govern, how you learn, how you teach, how you fight wars, how you fight crimes, how you commit crimes. And all of that you can see right now is in flux. Now, what is unique about our Promethean era is that, unlike previous ones, are two features. One is our Promethean era is not driven by a single technology, like a printing press or a combustion engine. It's actually driven by a technology supercycle. That is the ability to sense, digitize, connect, process, learn, share, act, all now amplified by AI. And because it has feedback loops, it just goes faster and faster, growing at a nonlinear pace. What would be an example? I was just in San Francisco recently with my grandson, 3.5 years old, and I took him on a Waymo, a self-driving car in San Francisco that Google makes. Amazing to watch your 3.5-year-old sit in the back seat of a self-driving car. What was that car doing as it delivered us from one spot to another? It was sensing, digitizing, connecting, processing, learning, sharing, acting, all with AI. We're putting that cycle into everything, from your Waymo to your watch to your F-35 fighter jet. What's also unique, though, about our Promethean era, and I'll stop here, is that it is paralleled by a climate supercycle. Emissions, warming, ice melt, change in ocean currents, change in wind patterns, extreme weather. And it also is driven by feedback loops. So it also grows at a nonlinear rate. And basically what happened in the early 21st century, I argue, was a big bang. These two supercycles converged, blew up basically the political left-right Euclidean grid that defined politics from the industrial age, and blew us into a new era where we humans have become godlike in 3 different realms. We have become godlike in cognition. We've developed an artificial brain greater than the Creator endowed us with. We have become godlike in connectivity. We can hear each other whisper. Yeah, I'm whispering here from Bethesda, Maryland, to my friends, in India, all right? We can hear each other whisper. We have godlike hearing. And lastly, it created a powerful enough human being that we are the first of our species to drive ourselves from one climate era, the Holocene, into the Anthropocene. We have become godlike in 3 different realms at the same time. Unfortunately, we don't yet have the 10 commandments.
Yeah, Tom, thank you for laying that out. And Carme, I'd love you to come into this. As I said, we've been discussing, not just AI, but all the converging technologies that are coming together at a kind of really, exponential pace. You've been at the heart of trying to figure out the framework for this technology, technologies, I should say, and the geopolitical kind of shifting field within which it's happening. So again, if you just do a quick distillation of some of the issues that you're grappling with, and maybe some of the answers that you may have come to yet.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me for this great conference and having the honor to share the panel with the most admired author, Tom Friedman, who explained to us that the world was flat and now it's no longer flat because technology alters the balance of power, not only between countries that can own specific critical minerals, for example, rare earths, or specific production capacity, like Taiwan with microchips manufacturing and design, but also between other non-country players, non-state players, like the big tech companies. So that is altering the status quo. This is why we talk about not only disruption, but hyper-disruption, because there are many phenomena happening all the time. So the status quo is finished, because what we thought it was stable is no longer stable. What made us competitive is no longer competitive. What used to be our friends have become our enemies. What the former enemies now become allies, so everything is stabilized. And no, it's still on that, we don't know. We are like in a transition generation between a world that we have inherited from the Industrial Revolution that no longer works, that is no longer functioning from the production point of view, the economic point of view, and societal, institutional point of view, to a new one that is yet to be defined. And in between, I think we need to solve 2 important questions that this generation must solve. One is climate change. We have seen all day long the potentiality of AI to reduce energy consumption, but at the same time, we have the paradox that the development of AI is everything against sustainability. We're using a huge amount of energy and water and CO2 emissions, so we need to solve that. But the most important thing for me is the ethical development of technology. So we have seen all day long all the potential benefits for humanity that AI has, and I'm an absolute believer that they can propose a lot of benefits for humanity in terms of access to knowledge. We have seen all the acceleration on pharma discovery thanks to AlphaFold.
We've kind of laid out that landscape here.
We have seen everything all day long. But if we leave this ungoverned, if we just leave this in the hands of very few powers, that cannot be realized. Because there are a lot of gaps that can increase. An AI divide, lack of transparency, therefore lack of accountability, and above all, lack of inclusiveness. These AIs have only been developed by data from the global north and computing capacity for the global north. So other faiths, other cultural heritage, other sensitivities are not included in this AI. So we cannot left global south, not involved in this development.
So actually, Tom and Carme, I'd like both of you to respond, to the next question that I'm going to lay out, which is that, do you think, when you're talking about Promethean moment, Tom, you're laying out the significances and impacts of these technologies, but I want to add to that, do you think for the first time, it is going to be ungovernable? Because for the first time, it is genuinely trans-border, it's trans-geographic, it's moving so fast. Earlier, both Arunabha and Gerard were speaking about, Arunabha spoke about the fact that territorial rights and property rights matter as well, because you have to have a jurisdiction of control, But here, one, it's transborder, two, it's geopolitical, is it China versus America versus Russia versus the global south? It's the big four, the big technology companies, but they're also making it open source, so many small players can come up, so it's also an ungovernable arena, and it's just moving too fast, Raj Shah was talking about how with technology moving so fast, even the Pentagon and others just can't keep up in a way, because the structures of governance are too slow and technology is too fast. So I'd like both of you to respond to that, Tom, it's you first.
Well, first of all, I really agree with all of the concerns that Carme raised. Yes, I think, remember, Shoma, this is like, I was at, Synapse 2 years ago, and I'm not sure we've discussed AI. So imagine how quickly this has all come about and how quickly it's been diffused. And so, especially the open source component with both Facebook and DeepSeek in China offering open source models. So controlling it is going to be very difficult. The best idea I've heard, because only AI can control AI, the idea that India will pass a set of laws, any AI system will get around that, as it would be with if America or Spain passed such laws. The machine could start speaking its own language, if it wanted to. So A, I don't know how we're going to control it. B, it can only be controlled by AI. And C, one of the most interesting examples I've come across of how to control it. My friend Craig Mundy, who was the Chief Strategy and Research Officer for Microsoft, recently wrote a book with Eric Schmidt and Henry Kissinger on AI called Genesis. And I was talking to Craig recently. He's been working on a program, basically, to teach moral reasoning to an AI system. And the way they do it is basically going back to where I first learned moral reasoning. I learned not to tell a lie through a fable. The fable was that George Washington chopped down his father's cherry tree. And when his father confronted him with that, he said, "Father, I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down the cherry tree." That's where actually I learned you cannot tell a lie. So what they did was create a program where they basically taught an AI system multiple fables and to learn moral reasoning from that and make that parallel with its decision-making processes, and insisted that the machine run every decision through the moral reasoning it developed through basically ingesting these fables. Have no idea whether it can work, have no idea whether it can scale, but we are going to need systems like that because only AI can control AI.
Wow, Tom, I'm going to come back to you on that, but what about you, Carme? As I said, you've been sitting with a lot of stakeholders. The UN Council for AI has more than 30 constituents in it. So what's your take on this?
No, I agree with Tom that the unique characteristic of this technology compared to others, for me, are three. First, it affects absolutely all the vertical sectors, even creative industries that were left out of the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution was about automation on processes. This is about processes, physical and mental processes, in the same way that the Industrial Revolution made strength become irrelevant. This revolution can make some cognitive functions become irrelevant, number one. Second, it not only affects the economic means or production means, it only affects society and beliefs, as we have seen with fake news and social networks. And the third one, which is for me the most important one, is the first ever technology that can continue evolving without human agency. And this is why you need to put governance mechanisms on it. And I want to make a very important difference, because technologies always mix it all the time, sometimes in purpose. There is a big difference between ethics, governance, and regulation. The industry says, you don't need to regulate me because I already have an ethics guideline in my company. We have counted in the UN advisory body more than 80 different ethical guidelines. Even the G7 Hiroshima guidelines on generative AI. Okay, that's why, that's fine. That's a code of conduct. But this is subjective. It can vary from country to country, from CO to CO, and it doesn't require accountability. What is important is governance. What are the instruments we put in place to ensure that companies, that governance, that developers, that users make a good use of AI, that it is not an unintended or misintended, unintended or intended misuse. And for that, we need instruments. And regulation is one of these tools, but it's not the only one. We should achieve accountability and governance through regulation, through transparency tools, through monitoring tools. And I think that's what we are proposing from the UN. It's not that UN becomes a global regulator. Markets will regulate it regionally, and everybody has its right to decide what we can do. I was the leading negotiator of the European AI Act, and for example, it is the first time in the world that we say there are 5 prohibited uses of AI. Even though something is technically feasible, I don't want this to happen in Europe. For example, social scoring in China. Even though China, you have social scoring, a massive surveillance from governments to your personal life, we say, no, I know this is technically feasible, but I don't want this to happen in Europe. Okay, this is the right to say the rules of the game. But at global level...
Would you share with the audience what social scoring is?
Social scoring is that the government has a ranking of the citizens according to their behavior. And if you are a bad citizen because I, individually, my government decides that you throw a paper in the street, then probably you don't have access to a grant to your children to school or have access to certain jobs. And that is absolutely subjective by the government, which is absolute power. So we don't want this to happen in Europe. But at global level, we're not saying this. At global level, we're saying we need transparency mechanisms, we need an AI policy dialogue, so all the countries align in very basic things, that we are going to develop AI according to international law, human rights, that we agree on the standards, that we agree, for example, on emergency mechanisms, if something wrong happens, that we define, accountability measures, and I think that's basic because otherwise people will not adopt AI massively. We're seeing huge amounts of investment, infrastructure, data centers all over the world. How are you going to have a return on investment? It only happens if this is adopted mainstream by all the vertical industries, by all societies, and we're not going to adopt this if there is no trust. And regulation builds a trustful environment that gives guarantees to consumers and citizens. And I think that should be the way to go.
So, both Tom and Carme, when Nita Farahani was here earlier, she was talking now even about brain data. And, I asked her a similar question. And she did say something. She said, actually, it's going to have to be driven also by consumers, because otherwise it's difficult for governments to put a framework or even international agreement. Because Carme, recently in the AI summit in Paris, there wasn't even a minimum agreement to even make a statement, forget about setting up the frameworks, And if America's not going to participate in it, it's anyway dead on arrival. So do you think that this push to create an ethical framework, Tom, is going to come from consumers? Is it going to come from companies? Is it going to come from governments? How do you even see it taking shape?
Well, one thing I feel confident of is it will never come from companies. Just look at Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook when he told us, it's going to be a wonderful technology. It'll connect everyone in the world, when it turns out to have these incredibly perverse side effects of actually enraging everyone in the world, it was too late. And then these companies are so big, they can basically capture states and parliaments to prevent any legislation. So I worry about that. I liked everything Carme said, and I would just add the issue I think she raised with social scoring is something we've learned in the last decade, which is the perverse nature of these technologies, broadly construed. I'm talking about AI, facial recognition, and telecommunications technology, social networks in general. What they actually do is they make inefficient authoritarians more efficient. They make efficient authoritarians super efficient, and they make democracies increasingly ungovernable. And I think this perverse effect of these technologies is something we're really going to have to wrestle with.
Let me add on something on precisely because I was fascinated by Anita and talking about neurotechnologies because it's something that is very close to me. Because when I was minister in Spain, I launched an initiative called Spain Neurotech.
Sorry, I missed that.
Spain Neurotech. When I was Minister of AI in Spain, I led an initiative called Spain Neurotech, which is the research center for ethical neurotechnologies, and we launched the Charter of Digital Rights already back in December 2020, when nobody was talking about this. And in the Charter of Digital Rights, we have two special chapters, one on AI and another on neurotechnologies. For example, the right of a second human opinion when an AI system, an automated decision, gives me out of accessing a loan or a medical treatment. I need a second human opinion. Another is the right not to be augmented, the right not to be discriminated by an algorithm, the right of free will, the right not to be augmented, for example, by neurotechnologies. And that evolved what we are working on, neuro-rights. And what I'm very afraid is that we leave all this on the consumer because that is a trap. All the consents, the terms and conditions are constitutions that affect 40 billion people in the world written by private companies. And people are not aware that they need to sign in a consent because they have no alternative. It's like take it or leave it. If you don't say sign in, you don't have the service. So there are no rights here. So people are not aware that they are already signing in for third-party use of their brainwave data. And my concern is that this brainwave data should not be treated as any other biometric data. Probably I don't care that my heart rate is in the hands of a big tech in Silicon Valley. But what would happen if our brainwave data, our neural data, was in the dark web, or was in the hands of private companies buying and selling your brainwave data? You will be listening to music, you will have an electronic impulse without you knowing that makes you buy this in Amazon or vote this party. So my idea is, why don't we make a special classification of neurodata and we treat it as a human organ? There is an international consensus that we cannot sell human organs. Of course, it is illegal, that is a black market, but everybody knows that we don't want to sell human organs. So why should we authorize to sell neural data? Because that defines who am I. So if we were able to consider that brainwave data is a human organ, then all the international prohibitions to commercialize with that could apply automatically. So I think that's a line of work, because otherwise, that's so risky.
That's a really important point, to recognize it as an organ it makes it tangible, and it makes, others one feels a bit lost about how is this going to happen, but I think to start giving it some definitions is an important thing. Tom, again, because you have access to precedents and, to corporations, to, across the world, that what is the thinking on this? That, for instance, Carme mentioned that you're going to need that kind of oversight. It can't be left to consumers. So do you see a kind of, there's an international body that oversees nuclear power, for instance, nuclear bombs. Do you think that that's a possible structure even for AI? And again, the real picture is that you had the EU AI Act, but already that's being diluted because there's a sense that Europe is going to be left behind.
I can comment on that.
Okay, yeah, and back to you, Tom, that when you're talking to people in government and in corporations, you said already corporates are not going to do it. What's the structure that you can see? And I'll come to China next.
Yeah, we've got several problems. One is the asymmetry between the depth of the knowledge of the AI innovators and the government regulators. This moment reminds me of a line in my book, Shoma, where a Boeing engineer was talking about, it was working on the MAX, was talking about his FAA regulator, okay? And he basically said, my FAA regulator is so clueless about the technology, what I'm doing. Watching him watching me is like watching a dog watching television, okay? So we have an incredible asymmetry between the knowledge of the innovator and the knowledge of the government people. Secondly, listening to Carme reminds me about why I'm such a huge EU fan, okay? So Americans will do anything for the European Union except read about it, all right? They don't want to know anything about the EU.
It no longer wants to do anything for the EU.
Of course, yeah, I say thank God for the EU because they are bringing these regulations to the table, and they have the size to make a difference, even if they are behind on the actual technology. So that's very, very important to me. But I am deeply worried. Counting on the companies to do anything responsible on this, like nuclear proliferation, doesn't apply here, Shoma, because nuclear weapons were invented by and in the hands of government. And these nuclear AI technologies are invented by and in the hands of private companies. And the competition over the profit motive between those companies and the competition at the national level for my companies to win the race to polymathic artificial general intelligence before your country's companies do, because the incredible power that would be derived by that makes it very hard and very tempting for governments not to want to regulate.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Tom, but Carme, you have a point of view on that?
So I think, Tom, you're probably one of the very few Americans that think that what we do in the EU is useful. So thank you, sir, for your moral support. No, I can tell you by heart, because I was the leading negotiator of the European AI Act. I had all the possible pressures from the lobbies. The last trialogue, which is the last discussion, took 38 hours, 27 without sleeping, because I knew that if I let them rest, they will not come back to the table, and that could not be approved. But it is enforced, so it's not an idea, it's a reality. It's one law for 27 countries, already came to force last August, and 6 months after, already the prohibited users must be out of the market. And the important thing, well, the bad thing is that Europe, we don't win the battle of the narrative. It is we always lose the battle of the narrative. So because the big tech companies are investing so much in public opinion, so much in lobbying in Brussels, we lose the narrative, and even the Europeans don't believe in what we do. But number one, lie. The European AI Act does not regulate AI. We do not regulate AI. We only regulate the high-risk use cases of AI. So we don't care about technology as long as before you launch a project in the market, you need to have a quality control as you have in any other vertical. So if I ask a bank, do you like to be regulated? They will say no. If I ask a pharmaceutical company, do you like to be regulated? They will say no. But they will never take a pill without Food and Drug Administration approval or my European body approval. That's number one. It's the same way I don't go to a restaurant without having any doubt that if I ask for a stick tartare, that will pass all the sanity controls, because otherwise I will not eat it. I would just eat at home. Number two is that the only thing we are asking to the large language models is for transparency, because they can propagate systemic risks. And if you use those general models to retrain them with your private data, you must be sure that you're not inheriting bias, that you're not inheriting illegal use of copyrighted material, and that's what we ask for. The question is, when I'm asking just for transparency, and the industry doesn't want to give it to me, what do you have to hide? Because all this information, they already have it. So this is the only thing. The other things we incorporate, which is very important, everything that has been generated by AI must be marked as generated by AI. So there is no doubt that I'm having a teleconference with Tom, and Tom really exists, because it could happen that Tom does not exist, and I don't know. So I must know. Because the real existential risk for humanity is not that a robot comes here and kills us all. The real existential risk is that we all become insane, because we cannot believe what we see, we cannot believe what we read, and we cannot believe what we listen to. And that's the end game The end game is we don't have trust in institutions and society, and we are an narcotized society that just left back and have no action. I think that's important. There is a way to do things in a wise way. There is no single justification for impersonation of AI. We can get all the benefits of AI without impersonating people. And James Cameron, the first one that used AI with Avatar, you have mentioned it, was very clever. He painted the Avatar guys in blue. So there is no confusion. So why don't we paint all the virtual things in blue? Otherwise, we are trying to use AI for social control. And that's the end game.
That's a really important point, Carme, about painting someone blue. So even if you're going to have a robot, rather than constantly making them in your own likeness, like you said, at least let's know the distinction between human and non-human. And, painting them blue is a good metaphor that, make sure that there's a distinction. Tom, I'm going to just come back to you for last round of questions, on China. But I just want to say something again, which is that I've been kind of putting out this idea that it's ungovernable, it's inexorable, it's coming our way, because I just want to also look at the reality of it. But just cycling back a little bit, Jaron Lanier, who's literally the inventor of virtual reality, he was at Synapse last year on Zoom, befittingly, but he said something which really stayed, and he said, this technology as of now does not exist outside of human control. How you're designing it is very much in human control, and I think, to say the corporates won't do it is really time for government to flex its muscles and say that here are certain things for the common good, which we will not allow the corporates to do, and I think it's important. Like you said, it's easy to sift what are the good aspects of AI technology and what are the things that are not good. And a good, easy example is to go back to the social media impacts on all of us. And I can't understand why, once we know that these dopamine loops are creating so much of, forget the political polarization, just mental health issues, they'll come up with another business model. Why aren't governments turning off the tap on these dopamine loops, So, Tom, what do you think about that? Before we come to your experience in China as the last round of questions.
They're captured. I mean, I don't know if you all watched our swearing in of our president, but who was standing behind him? Basically, the biggest AI companies, generators, their CEOs. He had them there as props. And they were happy to be there as props, or felt they had to be there as props, to make sure he didn't come after any of them. But there's a reason, Section 230, which basically says that the New York Times, if it prints something that is libelous, is subject to libel laws, but Facebook isn't. And these companies have captured our governments. The tech bros are all in now with Trump, and he's all in with them. And all they have to do is tell them, if you regulate us, we're going to lose out to the EU or to China, and there goes the regulation. So, if you just follow the news, I mean, we have a mafia government now, Shoma. If you haven't noticed, our Treasury Secretary went to Ukraine, put down a piece of paper that said Ukraine needs to sign over, to the president of Ukraine, sign over $500 billion in mineral rights. And if he didn't sign that paper, people in Washington were going to be very, very upset. That was the U.S. Treasury Secretary. That wasn't like, some just tech bro. And behind him is an enforcer named Elon Musk. So if you think this government is going to be the one to regulate AI in the beautiful ways, that Carme talked about, you haven't been reading the news of the past 2 weeks.
So let's just come then to this, this kind of bogeyman of China. You went there, Tom, and you did write about the kind of, everything exponential that we are talking is going to happen in the future, near future. You said, and in your columns you've written, that it has already happened in China. So give us, for those who didn't read your column, give us a sense of that. And then both of you say, this geopolitical war, so forget the domestic wars, what's going to happen with the geopolitical war? And is that going to be the justification for letting AI go on an unbridled ride, through human history?
Well, China basically took a great leap forward in advanced manufacturing in the last 6 years. We kind of missed it because of the 3 years of COVID and then the disengagement that followed those 3 years. So when I was in China, a few months ago, what struck me, I felt like for the first time, I was the only American in China. We've really disengaged at a shocking degree. And in that period, China has treated Trump basically the way America responded to Sputnik, back in the 50s. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, we realized we were really behind and we needed to double down on technology. Well, the same basically is happening with Trump, that China sees him as a fundamental threat. So they've taken a great leap forward. When I was last in China previously, Xiaomi was a phone company. I came back, they were a car company. Huawei was a phone company. I came back, they were a car company. BYD was a battery company. I came back, they were a car company. So China basically is not messing around with combustion engines. It's making a great leap forward, into what I would call the new ecosystem engine of growth for the 21st century. If in the industrial age it was steel, coal, and aluminum and combustion engines, if that was the ecosystem you needed to dominate. In the 21st century, it's going to be AI, robotics, neural networks, electronic vehicles, and autonomous driving. You need to have that ecosystem, I think, to really thrive economically. China is developing that ecosystem. Trump came in and basically said, we're not going to do EVs. Well, if you pull one part of that ecosystem out, you actually can't get to autonomous driving because combustion cars, gas cars, can't do autonomous driving in the way Waymo does because a gas car can't brake fast enough. So I'm very worried that China understands that that is the growth engine. I hope the European Union does as well, but we are going to opt ourselves out of part of that. For what I call right-wing woke reasons. We don't do green because green cars, are girly man, not for any other reason. And I'm extremely worried about the asymmetrical growth, between the U.S. and China. Look at DeepSeek. What did China do? Think of neural networks as an orange. So we thought, well, to build a bigger AI orange, you just need to add more neural networks. And China discovered a way actually to have a smaller orange, but through software and algorithms to squeeze more juice out of it, more AI juice. So, they're not standing still. They're not going to take this sitting down. This is a serious country. And if we, America, I can only speak for America, not the EU, if we aren't serious, we're going to get run over.
Well, Carme, last thoughts from you, on this whole war with China, this kind of geopolitical competition that's kicked in. And just the final thoughts would be, we chatted about it earlier, that could the Trojan, sort of weapon in sorting some of this out is to bring more women into the decision making around this, because maybe the perspective on it will be different.
I would add one perspective.
That was very feeble clapping, so we can see that's not going to be much of an answer at all.
No, that has to do with diversity. Now it's a forbidden word in the US, no? Diversity, equity, and inclusion is like now.
You mentioned that, Tom, I have to say this was very innovative.
I'm sorry, I have to leave. Since you've used those words, I'm going to have to leave. So,
so you cannot tell them, sorry.
Tom, but I have to say, you were very innovative right now. I noticed that you said it's called right-wing wokeism, given that wokeism has become something that they're really throwing as a grenade, it's good to say that that's right-wing wokeism. That's a new phrase.
I think that we can try to simplify it as we can, but even though we now are the lowest level of multilateralism and multilateral cooperation, the serious problems of humankind are still global. Climate change, inclusion, the AI divide. I mean, 2.5 billion people don't even have access to internet in the world. Imagine the AI divide. I mean, we're talking about operational efficiencies and artificial intelligence. That only affects those countries who already have ecosystems, which is global north. So that divide can increase. So there's something that doesn't match in the math. I mean, all the sector, especially the investors, make us believe that this is a race when the winner takes it all. And I don't see that happening. They make us believe that they have only 2 years margin to win this battle, that this battle is not now no longer the AI race battle, it's the battle for the control of energy sources. And this is why we cannot provide from our own country the data centers we need for these inefficient models that DeepSeek has shown that it can be much more efficient. So what has happened so far is that instead of investing in R&D from the private companies, we have outsourced that cost to public institutions. So I'm not optimizing my product because I ask you to give me all the energy I need. We're going to compete from 1 clean liter of water between a human and a machine. That makes no sense. And when things don't make no sense, there comes a point when they collide. And first a point when they collide. Because either there is a society upheaval that happened in the Industrial Revolution, or because the ecosystem does not evolve at the same path. And because you need to put all these pieces all together in the same speed, something will not match. And I really don't think that this is a battle between two. We have many other players. We have India with a lot of talent, with an open source strategy that President Modi specifically vocally said during Paris summit. We have soft powers like Middle East. They have many other players. So I see more these general models are not the game changer, because they become, I would say, like operating systems. If I use the operating system of Microsoft or the operating system of Apple or Linux, which is an open source, that doesn't make me more competitive. What makes me more competitive is how do I use these operating systems to find a clear solution of a clear problem in my vertical domain. And that is what will happen. We see really the critical advantage of one country versus the other is how they will use AI, how they retrain these general purpose models that I wish they would be all open source, so we can retrain with our private data, because these models cannot evolve without private data, because all the public data has already been ingested. So they are no different to the other. The only difference is if I have more muscle, more computing power, more energy, more chips, or if I have access to new sources of data, either data that the humans will generate, and probably we need a new decade, either data from the global south that nobody is taking the money to invest in these inclusive and representative data sets, or data from private companies or private sectors. And for that, again, we need trust. And I don't see that happening. So I have a small hope. First of all, that we're still on time to put in place governance mechanisms. And governance mechanisms are the one we have proposed and have been approved by the UN, as first of all, an international independent scientific panel that gathers scientific evidence, and we have a consensus of what are the risks and what are the opportunities? Because it's the first technology that has not been developed by the academia.
Sorry, that has not?
It has been developed by the academia, by the public-funded researchers that they publish what they discovered. This is on the dark rooms of the R&D centers of private companies. Why this has happened? Not because the public academia didn't have the talent, not because they didn't have the money, because they didn't have access to data. So based on the data monopolies, we are building the AI monopolies. So we should understand that they are monopolies, and we should regulate it as such. So that are the things that need to change.
Thank you very, very much, Carme. Thank you, Tom. I want to put out a word that you've come up with, or maybe it's just in the sort of stratosphere, is the idea of the polycene, and that it is many we have the polymaths, we have the polycene now, which is an era with many, many crises coming together. We've at least identified the crises. Hopefully next year by Synapse, there'll be a few more answers. Some of them are beginning to germinate, and it's been an exhilarating 2 days, and both of you were the perfect note to end on. Thank you very much for joining us, Tom. Thank you, Carme.
Thank you.